This is the Raising Rebellion podcast, episode number 5.
Welcome to the Raising Rebellion Parenting Podcast, where we will explore how to help kids seek purpose and passion, challenge society's expectations, and avoid a standardized life. Now here's your host, Paul H.K.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for being here for episode number 5. Today is a bit of a mini milestone for me. When I first started this podcast, Michelle Jones was at the top of my list of people who I really wanted to be a guest on this show. And today, I get to present to you my interview with her. She is a now retired traditional college professor who, after feeling frustrated by being unable to help her students figure out what they truly wanted to do in life, due to the constraints of the school system and lack of proper resources, she decided that she wanted to help her students on a much larger scale and decided to start her own college, which is now the Wayfinding Academy. A couple of quick notes before we begin. First, full disclosure, I'm a big supporter and have donated to the fundraising campaign for the Wayfinding Academy because I truly support their mission and what they're doing. And second, we unfortunately had some technical difficulties at one point while we were chatting, so you're going to hear a small gap and jump in the conversation at one point, which I'm a little bummed about, but just wanted to give you a heads up. Michelle is an incredible person. She's a servant to her students and to her community, and I think you'll find her efforts and work as inspirational as I do after hearing her story. So, without further ado, here's my interview with Michelle. Okay, today we are talking to Michelle Jones. Michelle is the Chief Academic Officer, President, and founder of the Wayfinding Academy. Michelle, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you very much, Paul, for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited. So why don't we jump right in and get started? My first question to you is, are you the savior of higher education?
Gosh. No, that's no small question to start with. I hope not. Mm-hmm. I think that the ideas that I have and that we have with Wayfinding Academy mm-hmm. can help to nudge change in the system of higher education in general.
Right.
I think it's going to take a lot more than just us, mm-hmm. but I also know that a lot of people are talking about this and coming at it from a lot of different angles. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that what we're doing with Wayfinding mm-hmm. can be an inspiration and create a viable alternative model that others can look at and say, yeah, that's how higher education should be. Mm-hmm. Why isn't it happening like that? And it should happen like that. And how do we switch what we're doing to make it more like that?
Right.
So I'm hoping it's not me, but this idea in general and kind of a regrounding in the roots of what's the point of higher education in general and how do we create thriving societies?
Right.
So I'm going to go with no. Hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
To that question.
Right. Well,
hopefully not.
Right. Well, hopefully you can be a catalyst to that whole movement.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we'll get into more details later. I think that's a great answer to kind of tease the rest of what we're going to get into in a little bit. But if you don't mind, I'd like to go way back to the beginning if we could. Can you talk about your childhood a little bit, what it was like growing up, what kind of a kid you were, your family life, and maybe your journey through school, if you don't mind?
Sure, no problem. I think in many ways, my childhood was pretty typical. I grew up in Texas. Mm-hmm. And when I was growing up, my siblings and I'm the oldest of 4 siblings, and we were all kind of told that we were expected to do well in school and to go on to continue our education after high school and go to college. And we all enjoyed reading a lot. We lived on 7 acres and had a lot of outdoor play space. And so we used our imaginations a lot mm-hmm. outdoors. We would turn like the forest out in front of our yard into this pretend house that we all lived in the afternoons after school.
That's great.
And it was pretty fun. And every Tuesday when I was growing up, my dad would take us to the bookstore in town and let us all get a book. So every week we got to choose a new book. So we had a pretty healthy book collection mm-hmm. growing up. And so I always loved the idea of learning and exploring mostly on my own terms. And I had good family support for my education, so I happened to do fairly well in school environments. Regardless of whether I was loving it or thriving or learning a lot or whatever, I knew how to do it so that I got good grades and got praise and stuff like that. And growing up, my parents made it very clear that they were saving up for us to go to college from the time we were little kids. So it was always kind of expected that, they've been planning for it our whole lives and we should be planning for it too. And among my peers, that was pretty common. That was pretty much what we were all expected to do. So we kind of did it without really asking why. And without really knowing when we went to college why we were going, what we were hoping to get out of it, how it was going to help us get to the next phase of our life. We just knew that we were completing a step that was set before us. And so I actually chose where to go to college. I went to college in my hometown, a wonderful, wonderful school, Trinity University. And I went there because the guy I was dating in high school for 2 months or whatever it is in high school, how that goes. I happened to be dating him, or whatever you passes as dating back then, at the same time as when you apply for colleges. And he was like, well, I'm applying here. And I said, oh yeah, well then me too. Right. So that's how I ended up. I applied a few other places, but that's how I ended up picking where to go to college, which is, I would advocate not for picking that way.
Right. But very typical.
I got lucky. Totally typical. Yeah. And obviously that didn't have a lot of intention and information behind it. It was just sort of what happened. Right. So in that way, my path was pretty common, fairly standard among my peer group. And I got lucky. I ended up at a good school. I met a couple of good mentors towards the end of my time there, literally like in my last year. And they came along just at the right time to help me figure out what my next step could be. Otherwise, I would have been completely lost and had no idea what to do. And then I ended up sort of following their advice on my next step. And at the time, I found myself, again, not having any idea why, just kind of fumbling through, and I was checking off all these boxes on the papers. Back then it was on paper form. Right. My advisors I'd meet with would hand me a paper and say, okay, which of these classes have you taken? Which ones do you still have to take? And I'd check off all these little boxes. And they'd say, well, it looks like you're on your way to a major in this. So you should just major in that because you only have 3 check boxes left. And I'd be like, okay, why not? Kind of thing. Again, not with much intention or much talking about why or what I would do with that later or what my interests were. Right. And so I ended up at the end finding myself majoring in business and psychology and thinking, well, what do you do with that? I don't know. And of course, now looking back, there's a lot of things you can do with that. But I didn't know at the time. And so I kind of ended up just going into whatever that took me to next, which was a graduate degree in California at Claremont Graduate University in organizational psychology. And so I kind of feel, that Steve Jobs quote that gets repeated a lot these days about how life only makes sense when you look backwards and try to connect the dots later. Right. I got lucky a couple of times and ended up doing something that set me up to, in the very, very long term, much later, do what I'm doing now. Because most of my study and most of my interest, it turned out naturally, was in trying to understand people and why they do what they do and helping people to find their motivation and be effective leaders by tapping into what they're passionate about and doing that and finding communities to support them in doing what they're doing, which turns out to be very helpful right now. But it took me about 20 years to pull all those pieces together and to make it make sense. So I don't know that my story is all that interesting in terms of growing up. But the piece that I find that's interesting is that all of my siblings and I have taken different paths. I did the very expected go straight to college and then go straight to graduate school kind of thing that my parents expected. My next younger sister tried that and it didn't work for her. So she transferred a few times, she dropped out a few times, and she ended up finally, many years later, going back and completing And she's now also a professor. She teaches sociology. And but her path was very different than mine. Mm-hmm. My other sister, hers is my favorite story. Mm-hmm. She went to school out of state, like expensive out of state type of experience.
Right.
And after 1 year realized, I don't learn this way. I don't like being in a classroom. I don't like the textbooks. I don't like the lectures. I'd rather do things with my hands, and I'd rather learn by doing. Mm-hmm. And so she dropped out, and everybody said, no, don't do that. Don't do that. You're ruining your life. And she says, I don't think I am. Mm-hmm. Like, the thing I want to do, I should take an EMT class, and I should get a job working in the forest, and I should, and she did. Mm-hmm. So she took EMT classes. She got a job eventually working for a spinal surgeon as a medical assistant.
Wow. And
she learned everything on the job and through these specialized trainings. Mm-hmm. And she's also a search and rescue commander, volunteer. She lives in Flagstaff, Arizona. So in the forests around Flagstaff. She loves everything she does, and she never got a degree. And even still, years later, she's wildly successful, very, very happy, doing all the things she loves to do. And people still say, oh, you didn't go to college? Oh, like there's something wrong with her.
Right, that's stigma.
It's fascinating to watch because there's not. And then my brother also went to college, again, transferred a couple of times. Ended up getting a degree in the exact field he thinks he wants to work in, and he can't get a job in that field because the training he had in his college it's in computer animation and graphic design, didn't prepare him for the actual work he would be doing. And so we all have very interesting different stories, but having grown up in the same family, right, with the same expectations.
Right. So interesting.
So I think there's no one path, right? I really do think the trick is figuring out what you think you want to do with your life, knowing that will change again and again as you get older, and taking the best path for you to get to where you think you want to go. And that there's no one path that we should all be following.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I love the story of your youngest sister who had that self-realization after 1 year in college.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly
Good
didn't
for
have
her.
that. Yeah, amazing.
Me neither.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I hope for my daughter. I hope she finds it early and she realizes it and then she goes after that. So that's great. That's fantastic. Okay. So, I've heard you say in another interview that after college, you actually took, again, you were kind of headed down that traditional path, and you started to realize that there just seemed to be a lot of, as you put it, hoop jumping, right? That in order to get to the next stage, you needed to do X, Y, Z, and it just kind of becomes a big game that everybody's sort of operating inside of, right? Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that and how you think you kind of came to the conclusion that path wasn't for you?
Sure. We were just doing a conversation with a prospective student who we're inviting to join us for our first cohort this morning. And she asked a similar question of all of us who are in this interview conversation with her. And I found myself saying, I don't think I'm so happy for her that she's realizing it when she's young. And I was sort of a late bloomer in this way. I didn't realize that the hoop jumping wasn't for me until I saw the damage it was doing to others, which then caused me to reflect on my own experience. Basically, I would say it started when I finished graduate school. I moved to the East Coast and got a job. I got a couple jobs teaching at universities in Boston. And the approach to higher education on the East Coast is a little less laid back than it is on the West Coast. And I thought that's what I wanted, right? I wanted to be where they take it very seriously. And after a year there, I got my first tenure track position, which is like the ultimate thing everybody strives for in academia.
Right.
And they give me the fancy office and the high paycheck, and I bought a house and did all these things. And about maybe 2 years into that, I started really observing the system that I was in, as opposed to just thinking about my own individualness, and really looking system-wide at what was happening, not only in the college I was teaching at, which was a lovely place, but also at all of the other ones. And I really started listening intensely to students and what they were saying about their experience. And at that particular place, I was what they called an undeclared student advisor. So I volunteered my time to help students who had not yet declared a major, help them figure out what they wanted to major in. And I listened to them intently as they said, I don't know, how am I supposed to pick this? There's just this list of words, and I'm supposed to pick one, and I don't really know what they all mean, or what I can do with them later, or how any of them relate to what I'm interested in naturally. Right. So I don't know really what to pick, and I'm worried I'm going to pick wrong. And everybody tells me, well, get more than one major if you can, and I don't see why I should do that. Can you help me? And I would help as best as I could, but we'd still find ourselves constrained, right?
Sure.
Even as we could have all these great, deep conversations of what they were passionate about, what they wanted to do with their lives, and all the things I do now, all the things that wayfinding is founded upon. Yeah. A different university. I actually moved to New Mexico and took a self-imposed sabbatical for soul searching for a year, while still teaching a little bit on the side. And then I moved up to the Pacific Northwest and went back to full-time teaching. But I was never the same kind of teacher, right? I was always, from that point on, 100% committed to students and their experience in the classroom, and I wouldn't spend my time doing things that didn't benefit that. And it brought me so much more joy and freedom and fulfillment, and I was able to feel like I was doing the work I was meant to do in the world. And starting wayfinding was the natural next step, because after 10 years of doing that, I felt like I had made as much change as I could make from inside the system, impacting one student at a time. Right. And I wanted to try to change the system more broadly. And the only way I felt to do that was to step out of it and create this viable alternative model.
Yeah.
I think I was a late bloomer to this. I didn't really realize that I was doing the same hoop jumping until the students were like, here's what I'm feeling. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling that too.
Right. So you had the perspective from the other side in order to help you realize your own feelings about the system.
Yeah, I think so. That's a good way to put it.
Okay. I'm guessing that for some parents, a lot of parents, to even suggest to our kids that they go explore a life that isn't defined or unconventional, it'd probably be frowned upon. I mean, it would make most of us very uncomfortable, probably more so than the kids, right? And maybe there's a bit of a fear of, being labeled as irresponsible, even, right? As we're looked at by other parents or whatever. Did you, or maybe even heard from your sister, but did you experience any kind of, doubt or pushback, either internally or externally, from others and maybe from family members or friends along the way as you were starting to make more of the non-conventional choices for yourself?
Yeah, yes, of course. And I feel when we start to make those kinds of unconventional choices, our loved ones, in my experience and in the experience of many of my friends, our loved ones are generally coming from the perspective of wanting the best for us and wanting to protect us from scary things and from risky things. And they give us advice from that place, right, I think. And there was one moment when I was leaving my job in Rhode Island, and I was talking on the phone with my dad, and he said, "This is a terrible idea." He says, "You don't have another job lined up. You don't know what you're doing next. You have a mortgage." And, and I had answers to all of those things, but he, because he loved me and wanted the best for me and didn't want anything bad to happen to me, was trying to say, "Don't do this." And I think in my personal experience, I just had to trust myself. I was in my, I guess I was in my late 20s at that time. And I had to trust that I knew myself well enough to know that I I wasn't happy doing the thing I was doing, and that I could see a next step, maybe not that huge of a next step, but a next step towards being more fulfilled and more happy and feeling like I'm more doing the thing I'm meant to do in the world. And I had to trust that and keep in communication with my loved ones and say, here's what I'm doing and here's why I'm doing it, and making sure I had that knowledge for myself, and then letting them see after I made that step that I really am happier now, that I really am more fulfilled, and that they should be happy for me too, and everything turned out okay. And it worked, right? In this case, it worked. They still don't understand all of the things I do. I tell my parents I'm starting a college from scratch, and they say, well, I don't understand what that means. So, and I think that's part of it too, right? I think in some cases, the thing we say to our loved ones that we want to do is an unknown. People they don't have the information because it doesn't exist. Because it's a new thing, it's an innovative thing. Nobody else they know has done it, like taking a gap year or, a travel adventure that's a bit out of the ordinary. And so to me, and this is what I would tell any student or anybody else who came to talk about this kind of thing, I feel like the real key thing is to understand why you're doing it, to think it through from all of the different angles, to understand that your loved ones are saying these things because they love you and they care. They're not necessarily because they're right. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And to really understand the why behind that, and as hard as it's going to be for them sometimes, they will come to the understanding that if they genuinely do love you and want you to be happy, and you have a next step towards getting closer to that happiness and thriving in life, they really do actually want you to take that next step.
Right.
And they really generally will totally support you when you do it. They just want to make sure you've heard the warning signs in advance or something.
Right.
But, I talk to parents all the time who are so excited about the concept of Wayfinding Academy and also nervous to encourage their kids, or in this case, their adult kids, to take this step because it's unknown. And after a lot of conversation, they usually do. They usually do say, son or daughter, if this is what you want to take as your next step, I'm going to support you because you're able to tell me why you want to do this and why you think this is a good match for you, which is, of course, what all of our initial conversations with students is about, is that matchmaking process. And the parents usually do say, yes, I completely support you in this, and I'll back you, and let's see where this takes you.
Right.
But it's scary for the parents because they then, how do they explain that to their friends and to their fellow parents and stuff like that? It's interesting. Yeah.
Right. Now you mentioned you took the gap year, right, in New Mexico. How important do you think that gap year was for you in order to have time to step away, to have that clarity? I mean, do you think that, gap years are becoming more and more popular amongst, high school grads, right? Malia Obama made it very popular this year. How important do you think that was for you in order to help you sort of clarify your path?
When I went to New Mexico for that year, I felt like I didn't have any other choice. I mean, I could have chosen a lot of different things to do with that year, but I felt like I had reached a point where what I really needed was some isolated time for self-reflection and to reground. I'd been going and going and going without any stopping, all the way through my education and higher education, and then getting a job and doing the thing that you're supposed to do. Right. And I'd never really stopped to think about it. And I suppose in my case, it didn't need to be a year, and it didn't need to be New Mexico, and it didn't need to be the exact thing that I did. But I think that for me, and I would say for everybody that I know, taking some intentional time to pause and think about, where am I right now in my path in life? And is it where I want to be? And, where I genuinely want to be, not where other people expect me to be, because I was right there. I was where everybody expected me to be, right? I had a house, I had a great job, I had a great salary, I had a PhD. Right. But really thinking about where I wanted to be, and then giving yourself the space and the time and the love and compassion that you need to work through whatever the answer comes out on the other end to be. It might be that, yeah, I'm pretty close to where I want to be, and I just need to make these couple minor adjustments, and then I'll feel like I'm on my way again. And in other cases, it turns out to be a whole life upheaval that is what you feel like you need next. But giving yourself that time and space to do it. And one thing I didn't have that I would recommend to people is if you can have a support system in place, somebody to help you ask and answer those questions and really help you think through and talk through those things. I felt like for me, that's what was missing. I intentionally chose to go to a place where I didn't know anybody, a place unlike any place I ever lived before, and do something like I'd never done before. I worked in a produce department of a food co-op because I wanted to understand better like how to eat healthy and produce and farmers issues and co-op issues.
Interesting.
But it was fascinating. I learned so much. And for me, I think my support system was basically the place I chose. It turned out that Santa Fe, New Mexico was a really good match for me and really exactly what I needed at the time. But I didn't have a support system. And so I didn't have anybody to bounce ideas off of and to talk things through with. So it maybe took me longer than it needed to answer some of those questions. But I also spent a lot of time hiking and in nature and exploring the southwest part of the United States. And in those moments, when I listened to myself, I actually found that I had most of the answers, that I loved teaching, that I didn't want to leave it, that I wanted it to be the center of my life's work, that I didn't care about how much money I was making doing it, as long as I was at a place where I felt like I could do it genuinely. And so I was able to answer some of those questions for myself and figure out what to take as my next step.
Right.
But it really took some listening time. So, and I think you can get that at any age, probably, and at any type of experience that's a gap type of experience, right? But figuring out what works best for you in that way, I think would be slightly different for everybody. But definitely having a support system, somebody to talk to, is a good one.
Yeah. Well, to me, it sounds like that's what wayfinding essentially is. It's kind of a gap experience that's structured and gives you that support and helps ask the right questions and think through things with you. So that's what I think I love most about the concept of wayfinding is it's that kind of structure that you give it.
It is. And then we layer on top of that structure this fairly rigorous academic component with a lens towards, not just academics for academics' sake, but all of our core courses are about how to be a good human being so that no matter what path you take later in life, because we're not just focusing on, people who want to be psychologists or business majors or whatever, but no matter what you want to do, this stuff will help you, how to make good choices, how to define happiness for yourself, how to understand science and technology these days, how to engage with information to find reliable answers to questions you have with all of the crap information that is out in the world. So these things, how to work in teams, how to communicate. So this will help you no matter what. So we layer that on the skill building stuff on top of the support network and those deep conversations about who do you want to be and how do you get there from here.
I love it. I think that's a nice segue into my next question, which is, can we talk about traditional colleges for a minute?
Yeah, if we must. No, I'm just kidding. Of course.
Of course, public funding for public education has been on the decline for decades now, right? From the outside these days, I feel like we see a lot of signs that, four-year colleges, four-year universities are essentially turning into businesses. And university presidents are now being likened to CEOs of major corporations. That's the kind of vibe that you're getting from four-year academia these days. Would you agree with that? Do you think universities have kind of lost their way in terms of their purpose and their priorities? And if so, where do you think that happened along the way?
Gosh, the first part of that question, I feel like I can answer fairly certainly, and I'm not so sure about the second part. Yes. it feels to me, as somebody who's been inside the organizations and watching how they've changed over the past 15, 16 years, I guess longer if you count my own time, my own 8 years in higher education institutions as a student, that it definitely feels that in that span of time, so I guess that's about 20, 25 years, that they have become more like businesses. And I've seen it as a faculty member in the way that they do budgets and they communicate about budgets, and in the choices that they make about where to allocate resources, and the striving for growth through things like online programs that bring in massive numbers of students but don't provide, even a small private liberal arts college, when they have 3 or 4 or 5 times as many online students as they do on-ground students, when what their niche really is, their service to the world, is the on-ground personalized education experience, that there's a disconnect there for me.
Right.
And I think, and this is what we keep seeing in a lot of the, New York Times articles and Washington Post articles that are coming out about higher education and how it's changing. And they're hiring more and more of those executive level folks, right? So they're hiring vice presidents of this and directors of that. And, so you've got a lot of that happening.
Right.
That didn't used to happen. That didn't used to exist. In just my 15 years of teaching, that has changed. Yep. In terms of what's causing it, I'm not so sure I know, other than, and maybe this is a good thing, that with the way that our society is changing, there are a lot of careers and paths and purposes in life that don't necessarily require you to go get a college degree. That there are a lot of things that you can learn on your own. Or maybe you learn on your own and you start your own business and you do a few things and then later you go back to school. But when you go back to school, you're doing it for a specific purpose and you know why you're going, and you don't really have the time and the patience and don't want to take out the loans for all of the things that you need to do. And so I think colleges and universities are scrambling to compensate for that by treating students as numbers. The more applications they bring in, the fewer people they can admit so that they get higher rankings, the more tuition they can charge. And therefore, it's all just a numbers game, right? They're always analyzing the data in terms of the numbers of how many to invite to get how many to accept, and how to increase tuition to make sure that they can make their budget numbers. And it feels, yes, that they've lost their way, because it's no longer about the student and helping them to succeed in life.
Right.
And this isn't true, of course, for the large public institutions. They do have a more diversified sources of funding than some of the small private liberal arts ones. But small private liberal arts colleges, most of them are so tuition dependent. 95% of their budgets comes from tuition dollars from students, which means that if they don't market the crap out of things and get way more applicants than they can take, because a lot of students aren't going to pick them because they're choosing between multiple places, they have a low enrollment numbers for a year and their whole budgets are out of whack. And it creates a different tone and a different environment and a different conversation with students that feels like, yes, I guess, a going away from the mission and purpose, at least from my experience. And mostly I got to be isolated from that in my role as a faculty member, because I could just go in my classes and do a great job and really connect with students, because the ones who were already there and already committed. But sometimes a student would be there for a year or two and decide, what, I really want to take a gap year, or I really want to transfer to this other school because it has a better major that's going to serve me better now that I know what I want to do. And the schools would try to prevent that. They don't want you to take a gap year. They don't want you to go to another school. They don't want you to transfer because they need the numbers. And that's where I really saw it most. And that was sad.
I feel like you're teeing me up so well for the questions that are coming next.
Excellent. My pleasure.
Perfect. Right. Thank you. So, of course, tuition costs are going up. You mentioned the larger public college systems, like, for example, the University of California. What they're doing to keep their revenue up is they're inviting more and more out-of-state students because those students pay a higher tuition rate than California students do, right? So that's kind of, which leaves less room for California residents to be admitted into their schools.
Right.
So with tuition costs going up, and of course, student loan debt on the rise and just being at insane levels, still, even with all of that going on, and even with as much awareness and publicity that there's been around those topics, there are really just a few major events in life that are really deeply rooted in emotion, I feel like, where all financial discretion is just really thrown out the window, right? Weddings and funerals and maybe a sweet 16 party and maybe when you have your first kid and, babies, all this stuff. Definitely education falls into that category as far as I'm concerned. Parents are they will do whatever it takes to get their kid into a brand name school, right?
Right.
So what kinds of things do you think people should consider, like that you would recommend, or maybe what questions might be good for them to ask in order for them to make a really good assessment for themselves as to whether a 4-year college would be a good choice for them?
Yeah, so that right there is the entire reason for the existence of Wayfinding Academy and what we're doing.
Yeah.
Is our bottom line is that we would like that question that young people are asked at that stage when they're making that decision in life to change from something like, what college are you going to, to change to something like, what do you want to do with your life and what's the best path to get there?
Right.
And then their answer be treated equally no matter what it is. So for some people, it might be to take a gap year next. For some, it might be to go straight to work in a field that they think they're interested in, they happen to be able to get a job in.
Right.
For some, it might be to go to a 2-year college and explore around a little bit. For some, they know exactly what they want to do, and that requires a 4-year degree. For some, they know exactly what they want to do, and it doesn't require any kind of college training. So really, what I want to do is change that question that those young people get asked, so that they feel like whatever they choose next after that high school rite of passage kind of thing. Hold on just a second. I've got people passing through.
No problem.
Cool. Okay, they've got it.
Okay.
This is the problem with an echoey basement.
Right. Not a problem.
So that question that young people are asked at that rite of passage is where I feel we should change the conversation, because if the questions change and everybody is making an informed and intentional choice about their next step, then they go into that whole thing differently. They may still decide that taking on a bit of debt is a responsible thing to do to get to their next step, but they know they probably have more information about it because they've looked at it from different angles, and they're making it more intentionally than they would have otherwise been making it.
Right.
So that's where I feel like the real change could happen and maybe should happen. A lot of the people we're talking to as students are past that point. A lot of them have already been through that rite of passage, already made a choice, later are coming back and saying, yep, that was not a good choice. I went to a fancy college in New York and it wasn't a good fit for me. And I was wise enough about it to leave after a year or 2 years. I still have some debt that I wish I didn't have.
Right.
I have no degree because I didn't finish.
Right.
So that doesn't feel worth it to me.
Right.
And they're coming to Wayfinding saying, with a lot of information and a lot of intention, saying, here's my life story. Can you help me take a next step without letting me repeat that feeling?
Yeah.
And our answer generally is yes. And that's why for some people, taking out some debt for any kind of higher education is going to be a necessity.
Right.
But there's a lot of different ways to do that, some of which are much more responsible than others. And unfortunately now, and this is a whole different tangent, which we don't need to go down, but all of the stuff that's happening in the financial and banking industry in our country, and more of that debt that students are taking out being private loans from banks as opposed to subsidized and unsubsidized governmental loans that have better interest rates. That's a big difference. Right. It's a big difference in terms of how that looks later paying it back. And it used to be that you were told, oh, but higher education debt is good debt. It doesn't have a negative impact on your credit score like other debt does, and this and that and the other. And that's still true for small slivers of types of higher education debt, but not as a blanket statement, right? So making sure that people have all of that information and knowledge going into it, and making an intentional and informed choice with the support of people who know what they're talking about is pretty important to us. Tuition at Wayfinding is pretty low. If a student works part-time outside of being a Wayfinding student, they can put themselves through the program, the 2-year program. We designed it that way on purpose because we feel like that's how it should be. And a lot of our students are in that situation. Some have parental support, but a lot don't. And we want to make that, we want to be as accessible to everybody as we can. But a few of them are still saying, yeah, even with that, I need to take out a little bit of loans. And so we're helping connect them to local credit unions and a local community bank that has helped us finance our building, for example, to help them do that, again, with intention and information. That, to me, seems the key thing is if you're going to make any of these kinds of big life decisions, having a child, getting married, all of those types of things you mentioned, that also seems to me to be things that should be gone into with intentionality and information.
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit more in depth about Wayfinding Academy, if we could. I've heard you mention before in another interview how you feel like the system is backwards, right? You choose a college and then you choose a major, and then you figure out, okay, well, here's what I want to do, and then you go try it out, right? And sort of the intention of Wayfinding is to flip it around. Can you talk a little bit more about the details of the program, what kinds of courses and curriculum that students will be taking along the way?
Absolutely, yeah. And thank you. You did an excellent job of explaining why the current system being backwards.
Right.
So the way we like to talk about it is that our mission is to flip the higher education system frontwards and start with that question of who are you and what do you want to do with your life? And with that in mind the entire time, start trying things out with a support network and with a community and with some connections, but again with that intentionality and information. And students won't ever be asked to check a major from a list or check boxes to make sure they've taken a science class and a math class and a writing class. We have science, math, and writing throughout the entire curriculum. They will get that, but they're not going to be feeling like, I have to take a math class now, So, but it's all designed, the entire program, and we chose 2 years on purpose. And we could have done a 1 year or a 4 year or a whatever. But 2 years is on purpose because it didn't feel to me like it should take 4 years to figure these things out. And 1 year may be enough to get a lot of those conversations rolling, but 2 years is enough to take some action, solidify it, and actually start doing your next step so that when you leave the program, you're not now in a well, now what do I do kind of phase. You've already started doing it probably, and it's a somewhat natural transition to the next thing that you're doing. So we designed it all around that concept, which means that our core curriculum, which is 9 courses spread across over 2 years, are multidisciplinary, cross-sectional courses that look at things the way human beings look at things. So one of my favorite examples is the second course that students take, which is called Understanding Our World. And they're basically looking at economics and sociology and history and science from the perspective of I'm a global citizen in the 2000s, and I want to understand how our world came to be the way it is right now. What are all of the influences that got us here? What are the bad ones that got us here? What are the good ones that got us here? And what is it likely to look like for the next 500 years? And how do I prepare myself for that? And how do I use that knowledge to tap into what I care about? And so all of the courses look like that, right? It's a question like understanding our world or making good choices or the good life. And it looks at it from lots of different angles. And then I went out, so I designed the curriculum with some help from some very smart people. And then I went out and found the best teachers I could possibly find. The people who I know who have taught in higher education, they know the system, they know what they're doing, they know the frustrations. And they're the best classroom teachers I've ever seen in my entire life. And they don't do things like textbooks and grades and tests and whatever. And they were looking for an opportunity to just fully thrive in a higher education environment where they weren't constrained. And I said, come be with me. And they did. Everybody I invited said yes, which was wonderful. And so I've built this faculty out, and they're working as a group, right? The 7 of them, well, 7 of us, because I'm one of them, we're working together to create a curriculum that weaves together the way a curriculum, in my opinion, should. That it takes students through this conversation through 2 years. But that's only half of the student's experience. That bit is about how do you be a good human being, a good member of our society and our world, no matter what you do. And then the other half is all about exactly what the student thinks they want to do. So it's internships, it's portfolio items, it is labs. So we offer these series of labs, which are like short spurts of a weekend long, or every night or every Wednesday night for a month kind of format, where we get an expert to come in and teach the thing that they're expert on. So you get to kind of get a sampling of something like, I don't know, how to start a podcast, or how to do a crowdfunding campaign, or how to be a project manager, or how to do personal finances. And students can opt in for as many of those as they'd want based on their areas of interest. And they have an advocate, a member of our staff, who works with 5 or 6 students and helps guide them through that process of choosing which labs they want to take, of connecting them with mentors, of helping them find internships in their area of interest, helping them choose additional activities like our Learn and Explore trips, where we actually go out into the world and do things where we're learning and exploring and seeing things from other people's perspectives. So the advocate program, the advocates are designed to be basically the one-on-one academic coach, if you will, to help the students navigate not only the 2-year program, but also they're getting their next step in place. Whatever they're doing after wayfinding, we want them to feel like they're seamlessly transitioning into that with confidence and the intention and the information that they need. So that's sort of the academic perspective of wayfinding. I think there's a lot of other stuff that'll be happening on the side. Right.
That's fantastic. Just listening to all the different elements that you're putting into that, where not just the academic side, but the questions, I think, is fantastic. The kinds of questions that you're asking and you're having people think about, paired with the advocates and the mentors and the hands-on experiences and the field trips. I mean, it really sounds fantastic, and is why I'm so happy you're talking to me about this today.
Thank you for asking about all of this and for your enthusiasm. Sometimes when I talk to people, I feel like the response that I get from them is like, yeah, well, duh, that seems like how higher education should be. Yeah. And it really doesn't work that way? No, I guess it really doesn't work that way. So yes, right?
It's, what's kind of nice and refreshing is that just to know that there's an option. I think there are a lot of people who will kind of come to that realization early and kind of be unsure if a 4-year university or even 2-year community college or whatever is right for them. Right. It just to know that something like the wayfinding is out there, I think is great, because I think it's all about options, and yours is awesome. So,
thank you.
Yeah. So I know you talked a little bit about this already, but can you maybe talk a little bit about your inaugural class, and maybe what kinds of characteristics do you see your ideal students having?
Yeah. Absolutely. We're actually pretty excited about our inaugural class. They've surprised us a little bit in terms of who they ended up being and how they ended up finding us. And that's been really a fun discovery process for us. I wouldn't say that we have an ideal student in mind, except that it should be somebody who loves learning for the sake of learning,
Yep.
doesn't mind being stretched, into new directions and questioning some of the assumptions that they come in with, and who feel like they can thrive well learning in a community. That they don't want to just be going and sitting in a corner with their computer and learning, because that's not how we will do it. So I guess it's more about the characteristics like that.
Okay.
But aside from that, it looks like our inaugural cohort is pretty diverse, which is great, which is what we want, because it helps with the stretching and the types of conversations we're having, and everybody will bring different perspectives. Our youngest student so far, we still have some spots left at the moment that you and I are talking in our inaugural cohort. But so far, our youngest student is 19, and our oldest is 38. And they come from all over the country. So we have students coming from California, Washington, Oklahoma, so all over the country. And they've usually found us in one of a few ways. One way is through the World Domination Summit, which you and I are both part of.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, a community of people who already kind of know they want to take an unconventional path.
Right.
And so especially some of our older students have come to us through that route in some way or another. They either saw me present at WDS last year, or they heard about it through that community or something like that. The other thing that we're noticing is that almost all of our incoming cohort, not quite all of them, but almost all of them have tried a traditional model of college already and found it to be lacking, found it to be not serving them well. So they come in knowing what they don't want, which gives us more confidence that they're picking us with that intention and that information that we're hoping for,
Right.
So a couple of them even already have, like 2 of them who are coming already have associate's degrees. So basically at the end of Wayfinding, they'd get another one of those. And then a couple of the folks who we're talking to right now and doing interviews with right now, like final interviews with right now, already have bachelor's degrees. And in fact, this morning, one of the students we're interviewing with directly said, like, I knew this to be true, but she directly said, I don't care that there's a degree at the end of this. That's irrelevant to me. I want the experience, and I want the program, and I want what it has to provide. So that's pretty typical. We expect some of them will want to go on, or will need to go on into a 4-year college to do the thing they end up deciding that this is their next step. Which is why we made sure we went through the process with the Oregon Higher Education Coordinating Commission, got all of their approval, can grant a degree at the end of the program, and so that's transferable, all that. But we don't think the majority of our students will. I could be wrong, but at the moment we don't think the majority of them will choose that as their next step. But we want there to be no barriers if they do. So far, and they've started to meet each other, and we're pretty happy. That seems to be going very well. They're already talking about like visiting each other on road trips and stuff before school starts, and, whatever, that kind of stuff, which is, super fun to be watching that. But what it seems to be happening is in most of their cases, they feel like they've spent at least some portion of their life searching for a community who sees the world the way they do.
Right.
Who wants to live an unconventional life, who wants to take a risk, who wants to stretch themselves. And they are feeling like, from what they can see so far, this may be that community for them,
right,
that they've been seeking. And that's pretty neat, because I don't think there's anything more we could hope for than that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that moment of when you kind of find your tribe. Like in WDS, for me last year was my first year, and as soon as I went there totally solo, didn't know a person. And an amazing experience, and I think just that idea and experiencing that is awesome.
That experience of finding your tribe and feeling not alone in that can totally change your life.
Yeah,
it changes the direction of you and I don't know each other well, but my guess is that this podcast and this work that you're doing now partly is traceable back to that experience, probably.
It's directly traceable back to
exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about your application process. So I know that you are still in the process of accepting applications for your inaugural cohort this fall, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that, just in case people are they hear this and they would like to apply?
Yeah, absolutely. So much like everything else we're doing, our application process is a bit non-traditional. And we do have a few spots left. We've sort of geared ourselves up to take a range of anywhere from about 14 to 24 students in our first year. And we still have some of those spots available. So the couple of things I would want to say is that the first step of applying is getting in touch with us, either through going to the website and clicking on the Become a Student thing, or sending an email to hello@wayfindingacademy.org, or even just sending an email to Michelle or Jed at Wayfinding will also get you there. Because the first step is to say hi, to introduce yourself, and have a brief conversation with me or Jed, probably, about what you're trying to accomplish in your life, where you are right now, and what you think you want your next steps to be, and how Wayfinding might be a good match for that. Because the whole thing is really not so much an application process as a matchmaking process. And we want to make sure that even if you choose not to come to Wayfinding or not to apply to Wayfinding, there's still some value there in helping figure out what your next step could be or should be based on what you want to do.
Right.
And then if we decide, yes, this seems like a good match for both of us, we send information about how to log in and do the application. And that is also designed to be beneficial even if you don't end up coming to Wayfinding Academy. It doesn't ask you for typical things like your transcripts and your GPA and whatever. It has a couple of demographic questions, and we always explain why we're asking demographic questions if we're asking those. And then the rest of it is sort of this, who are you? What are you interested in? How do you see the world? What do you want to do next with your life? And it asks a series of questions that way. Why college, right? Why do you think that going to a higher education institution based on your life experience thus far is a good next step? And this year, we're asking in particular, why Wayfinding Academy? Because we want them to understand they'd be part of our inaugural cohort, which comes with some interesting little, I don't know, benefits you could call it, but quirks maybe. You know, like the local newspaper did an interview with me yesterday, and because we're starting a college from scratch, he was like, can I talk to a couple of your students? You know, which normally a reporter wouldn't ask probably, right? So, and yes, of course, a couple of students said yes, they'd be happy to do that. But, you know, that's because of the inaugural cohort thing. So we ask that in the application to make sure that we're all on the same page, we know what we're getting into. And then, and we expect that application, and students can write their answers, they can record videos, they can do audio, whatever is their best mode of communication is fine for us in that application process. And then after that, we have a team of amazing dedicated community members who reviews it. So it's usually a member of our staff and a faculty member and a board member and what we call our luminaries. Our luminaries are the people who financially give on a regular basis and who have opted into being involved more than just giving. So they also review applications. And then after that, we have either an in-person or via video conference, which we did this morning because the woman we were talking to is in Sicily. So that's great. So we all had to get on video and talk to her. And we have like one final conversation to make sure, you know, now that we know each other a bit more, to make sure that it's a good match. And that whole process, if we operate at our very, very quickest on our end, and I guess if the student is pretty quick with, you know, from the time they get the link to apply to the filling out the application, that at the very, very fastest, that process would take about a week.
Okay.
You know, it usually doesn't. It usually takes about 2. So in terms of planning purposes, that it's not just a hop online, fill out a quick thing and be done with it sort of thing. Okay. We really want to make sure that we're good matches.
Right. Okay. You know, it seems like that there would be kind of a common denominator of having a healthy curiosity element in people that are coming to Wayfinding, I would think. You know, do you?
I would agree.
Okay. Okay. So let's just say, for example, maybe somebody isn't as in tune with that. And they decide to come to Wayfinding and they're accepted. Do you think it's possible to teach or maybe re-educate curiosity? I think we're all born with it, right? But maybe we lose it along the way. Do you think that's possible?
I would probably choose the word reawaken curiosity, because in my experience, we all have it. And some of us, as we're adults, we have it about very specific things. We don't have it about other things, but we have it about certain things.
Right.
And I think for many of us, what the education system does, at least the traditional one, is it kind of squashes that curiosity out of us as we get older and older and older. And so some of the, especially the younger students who are coming straight out of high school or pretty close to straight out of high school that we talk to, can remember that about themselves, that they used to have this curiosity about this thing, or that they used to be really into that thing. And in our conversations, what we find is it usually takes a little longer and a lot more question asking, but they can re-find that curiosity, reawaken that in themselves. And if that can happen, and it usually can for most people I've ever met, then yes, I think you don't have to arrive to wayfinding with that, but you have to be open to it being reawakened if it isn't already.
Right. So I guess how much of it do you think it is that people just have to go and experience things for themselves? I mean, that seemed to be the case for you, certainly, right? You just had to get out there and realize and see it for yourself. Okay, this is not what I'm not really comfortable with. I don't really like this. Maybe there's something I can do about it. How much a part is experience that people just have to get out there, experience the bad that comes along with the path in order to figure that out for themselves?
I think, when I look at a lifespan of a person, it feels like that's essential. That we're going to make choices and we're going to make best guesses and we're going to choose a path for ourselves. And hopefully we do that again with intention and information. But that until you actually start doing it, until you actually start having those life experiences and accumulating some of them so that you can see patterns emerging in your own self and your own life, I don't think you'll ever really know. But I also feel like, most people are going to change what they do multiple times throughout their lives. We grow and we change and we find new interests. And that's part of the excitement of being alive these days. And having a set of skills and feeling confident that when you encounter one of those moments in your life, like for me, when I left the East Coast and, I'd spent years preparing for this one career path, and I decided, wait, let me pause and think about this and see what I should be doing differently. I mean, I'm sure that's going to happen to me again. I'm almost 40, I'll be 40 in a couple of weeks. And I'm sure that in the next decade, I'll be facing that same kind of question, right? Who am I and what do I want to do with my life next? Right. And we all do. So I feel like building up those experiences and feeling like you've got some skills to prepare you for that, some confidence to prepare you for that, and maybe ideally a support network of people who you can go to when you have those moments is probably a thing everybody should have.
Right. So, it seems to me, Michelle, that what guides you and drives the actions that you take is this, there's a very strong desire to serve others, right? And in your case, it would be students. Where do you think that value of service came from for you?
I have no idea. I have a very pessimistic idea that I'm not sure you're going to want to use.
Okay. What is it?
I could share it with you. I'm not sure you're going to want to use it.
Okay, let me hear it.
Once upon a time when I was very young, I was probably, 9 or 10.
Okay.
Somebody very close to me who I thought knew me well told me that I was a selfish person, or this thing that I had done was a selfish thing. And I was asked to write some essays on why had been selfish and why being selfish was bad. And I did that under great duress. I didn't want to do that because I didn't feel like the thing I had done was selfish. Yeah. And I tried to explain, my perspective on it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't good enough and wasn't good enough. And I ended up not being allowed to, be ungrounded until I was writing the essay the way I was supposed to write it. Right. Mm-hmm. And something about that experience stuck with me, so that somewhere along the line, I made the decision that I never wanted that experience again. Mm-hmm. I never wanted again for people close to me who cared about me, who I thought knew me, felt like the things I was doing were selfish.
Yeah. And
that sounds very, very vague and like weird, maybe, that could drive all of what you see now, 3 decades later. Yeah. But it's the closest I can come to maybe explaining where that came from. Mm-hmm. People often think, well, first of all, they think I'm crazy for taking a risk and starting a college from scratch, and nobody does that. But I'm also doing it with no income, right? So one of the commitments I made when starting Wayfinding Academy is that I'm not taking a salary so that I can pay other people to help make this thing happen. Mm-hmm. I'll do it for the joy and the passion and the love of doing it and the commitment to the vision and mission. Yep. And so, of course, our staff and our crew, everybody is. But so that they can earn an income doing this, I am not. And maybe that's too extreme of proving that I'm trying to be selfless. I don't know. We'll find out. I'm 7 months into that plan, and so far so good.
Okay,
but
good.
We'll find out.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's the real answer or not. Yeah. But it's the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that.
Okay. I mean, I'm a big believer in our experiences as kids, as we're growing up. I think that even those little moments, like you just shared, and thank you for sharing that, I think can have a lifelong impact, even if it's just kind of a nugget. I don't think we can trace it back to say, okay, well, because you had to write that essay is why you're starting a college, but I think it does. I think it does grow and foster. Maybe. Yeah, maybe it does. I don't know. But I do think that things that happen to us as kids, do affect how we are as adults and parents. So that's super interesting. Okay, I have taken up way too much of your time, so I have one final. You're very busy right now. You have a college to open.
That thing.
There's that thing. I have one final question for you. This is a question that I ask of all my guests on the show. What advice can you give to parents or kids on how to become a successful rebel in life?
Yeah. I would say two things. One is to know your why, because you're going to get asked that a lot. And so being able to articulate that takes you a long, long way. And the other thing I would say is to find in yourself or in your community of people who care about you and support you, like a dose of moral courage that you can rely on in the hard times. Early on, those hard times will be much more often than they will be later. Mm-hmm. I'm now 10 years onto this path of choosing the rebel life, and it's pretty easy now. It's really not very hard anymore. But early on, I needed lots of those doses of moral courage.
Right. Great answer. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This has been really fun, Paul. I really appreciate it. Thank you for reaching out.
Oh, no, absolutely. It's my pleasure. It's really exciting for me. I tell you, as soon as I started this whole podcast idea, you were one of the first people that popped into my mind because I saw you on stage at WDS last year. I'm like, she has to be on the show at some point. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I just got to ask her.
And you'll be back at WDS this year, yeah?
I will, yeah.
I can't promise anything, but I may or may not be back on stage again.
Okay.
With an update.
Okay. We shall see.
We shall see.
Right. Okay. Michelle Jones is a former traditional model college professor and is now the founder and president of the Wayfinding Academy that is re-envisioning higher education and launches this fall in Portland, Oregon. Michelle, I consider you to be a true public servant. I mean, I wish elected government officials would follow in your footsteps, quite frankly. They could learn a lesson.
Wow.
So, thank you for everything that you do and the work that you do. Thank you for taking the time to come on the show today. Please don't hesitate to let me know if I can be of any service to you in the future. It really would be my honor. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I will see you at the WDS Academy on August 11th.
Yes, indeed.
We'll get to meet in person.
Oh, that'd be awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
Okay, we will talk to you later, and best of luck with all your planning.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. A big thank you to Michelle for taking the time to come on the show today, especially in the middle of all of her planning. Thank you very much, Michelle. Our website is raisingrebellion.com, where you can find all of our podcast episodes, show information, and sign up for our mailing list. If you're enjoying our podcast, please head over to iTunes to subscribe and or leave a review. It helps the show a lot if you do. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate you listening, and until next time, go Rebs.
The revolution will not be standardized.